Welcome, everyone, to episode 6 of Special Codes. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Taylor.
And today we are going to be talking about HTML tags and how they help us or connect to us becoming more human, making life better for us. So Taylor is going to take it off and introduce us into the topic of HTML tags and kind of give us a foundation for us to work off of in this conversation. So Taylor, take it away.
Sure. So last episode 5, we talked about HTML and laid that foundation. And HTML is basically the language of appearance. It's what you see on a website. And now we kind of want to get into more of the nitty gritty, although still fairly surface level of HTML. And one of the most important concepts within HTML is the HTML tag. HTML pretty much runs off of tags. Think of them as containers or boxes or jars. You have specific tags that contain specific things. So, for instance, we have the general HTML tag, which is just the tag that you put at the start of it, so the browser knows where your HTML is. You have your head tag, and that can help define the title of the page and define where all the metadata of the page is and all of that. And then you have the body tag, which can help your browser know where all of your content is. And within all of those tags, you can have other tags. So think of it this way. The HTML tag is like a big box. And within that box, you have other little boxes, like the header is another box. The body is another box. And then within that box, you have other little boxes, like your div or your span tags. And these are incredibly important in HTML, especially now in the modern era, because div and span tags are basically the containers that tell your browser where everything you want to display is and where it displays. A div tag could hold images, text, forms, tables, and span is very similar in that regard. However, the huge difference between a div tag and a span tag is how the browser treats it. Think of your page as a grid of columns and rows, and your div tag goes along the columns and the rows. It goes within those sections. The span tag views itself as almost like text. So it goes within the same line. So it's not necessarily within the same grid column, but it's within the same line. So anywhere you have a div tag, think of it as a grid pattern. Anytime you have a span tag, it's just in that same line, along the line. And there's so many other tags in HTML, and they all do different things. And we could sit here for hours going over and over all of them and what they do. But the basic idea is HTML is a bunch of boxes put together inside of each other that you unpack to see what it is.
Right. And by unpacking, you don't mean we unpack it, but the computer unpacks it and uses it to interpret what we're seeing, because HTML is a visual code, correct?
Correct. It determines what you see on the screen. Basically.
Right. So as it's going through the layers of boxes, it's displaying what it's uncovering. Is that correct?
Correct. It goes and opens up all of those boxes, and whatever's in those boxes, if it's a display item, it'll pull out and display, and where it displays is determined by which box it's in.
And it's a kind of a top down opening. But if you don't have the right code on the first box, it's like, nope, that's not a box I'm supposed to open. So if you like start with the wrong HTML code, then the rest of the page is going to be messed up.
It can look really strange if you don't do it in the right order or the right way.
Just a point of clarification for everybody. We're not a tech ed thing. So we're not really here to say like, this is how you do a body tag. We're not going to be going into deep detail on this. What we're doing is introducing some things and making some pretty big connections. But one of the things that's really interesting as we've talked about this is when we take tags or these boxes and we label them incorrectly, what are some of the consequences that can happen?
You can throw off the format of your whole page. You can just make the whole page die after a certain point if you do it really poorly.
So like as it's unpacking things, it's like, nope, we're not going into that box, and you can only display certain parts of it. Is that correct?
Right, correct. So one of the most common things is because when you have a tag, you have the tag opening and a tag closing. If you open a tag at some point somewhere down the line, you have to close it. Because if you don't, weird things can happen. For instance, think of it this way. If you have a whole bunch of boxes and you're trying to put them inside of bigger boxes to store them, but you completely remove one of the sides of a box as you're putting it in and you're stacking it next to other boxes, well, depending on what happens, that box might either get shoved inside another box or it might envelop another box when you're not expecting it to.
Or you could be looking infinitely for where does this box end for me to open and never get to the boxes inside. Yeah, that makes sense. And it can really mess up. And again, just pointing back to the visual aspect of HTML, what we're able to display. Is there anything else that connects to HTML that helps display things kind of similarly to HTML?
Specifically for HTML, there's something that goes along with this that's important to learn. It's called CSS, or cascading style sheets. That's where you get your fancy stylings and how you change colors and looks and styles of things. But I would say that should probably be its own episode in and of itself.
Yeah, totally.
And Bootstrap is a way of programming HTML. It's a new way of doing it that has come about in the recent years with the advent of cell phones and internet on cell phones. Because if you look at a website on your phone has very limited space, so things can display strangely or might not get the whole picture. You can tell the difference between a website that isn't bootstrapped and is bootstrapped just by looking at it on a cell phone and how friendly it looks to you and how usable it is on the phone. So Bootstrap it takes the idea of the grid pattern that I mentioned with the div tag, and it really focuses on that grid. And it also makes it a lot more fluid. If you program in Bootstrap, it really helps your web page display the way it's supposed to display on every device, because it can see how much of the grid it's supposed to take up, and it can resize itself on devices. It's just so much easier to use as an end user or somebody who's using the website if you have a cell phone, if it's bootstrapped.
And it probably reduces load time too, because if you have a massive image, if it can resize it and shrink the size of download speed for pages, it probably makes like cell phone use a lot better because you're not waiting forever for something to load. Does it do that in Bootstrap?
That's a little different, but
Oh, okay.
you have the right idea of it making it easier for the phone. Because in the past, and a lot of people who have had cell phones in the past, you don't come across this so much anymore because a lot of people are now using Bootstrap or Bootstrap similar things. Is if you went to a website on a cell phone, you wouldn't be able to see the whole page, or things would be either really, really small and impossible to see because it would resize that whole page to the size of your phone, but it wouldn't adjust the text.
Mm-hmm.
Your Bootstrap takes care of all of that.
Nice. Makes it a little bit more friendly.
Yes.
It's interesting as we were talking about this code in particular, and I think this one is one that it's harder to necessarily get into because one of the things that we notice with HTML is it's a very visual code. And not in the sense like code, you can see it and it's really pretty, but it's a visual code in the sense that what it does is specifically connected to what is displayed or what is visual. And as we were talking about this and trying to find ways, well, really not finding ways, but it naturally made itself apparent that we as humans are very visual people. And as we think about the visual connection of the code that displays what we want to, we were kind of wrestling and getting into this idea of the code for ourselves and the connection that proper code works and how it works across different formats. And also, well, I guess proper might not be the right way because HTML, there's not necessarily one right way to do it. Is that correct?
There's a whole lot of different ways you could display the same web page.
Right. And like the order doesn't necessarily, I mean, it helps for some people, but honestly, it's up to the designer of the code.
Right.
As long as they're willing to work with it. With the code, there's many different ways to display the same thing, but there's also many different ways to display different things, and they're not all wrong. You can go to specific websites and know the difference between a well-designed website and one that was done by somebody who has no idea what they're doing. What are some examples or what are some things that you see as you're looking at websites of people who know what they're doing and don't know what they're doing?
Where they put their scroll boxes.
what do you
That's a big one from me.
what do you know? What do you mean by that?
Something that annoys me, and I might be the only one here, but if it annoys you, let me know too in the comments. But when I'm scrolling on a website, if I'm scrolling down and then there's a box, a scroll box, like with a lot of text or whatever in there, and I'm just scrolling and I want to scroll down to the end of the page, see what's there. And it goes into that scroll box. And now when I'm scrolling, it's just scrolling through that scroll box and not moving down on the page. That annoys me.
Oh yeah, I'm on the same page. I can tell me how many times I've run into websites where I'll want to get to the next section and I can't because the scroll bar doesn't work. Or I'm on my phone. This is another one of those phone where it doesn't translate very nicely. You're swiping and you're swiping through this dumb scroll thing and then you get to the end of it and it won't scroll to the bottom because you've reached the bottom of the scroll of that one text.
Mm-hmm.
And so with some of these things though, there is a purpose and a place for them, but at the same
Yes.
time, sometimes their functionality is not really used great. And what we were talking about is as humans, as we think about displaying ourselves, there is this amazing beauty that we see around us that people are able to express themselves or to give certain messages by appearance alone. When I actually, so in college, we went to college together. There were individuals that were in our dorm who dress certain ways. Like if you see somebody walking around with Abercrombie and Fitch or different name brand types and they wear the cologne, what's the message that they're sending? Usually, I mean, what would you interpret that?
Who you ask?
Well, okay, that's a great thing though. That's kind of what we're talking about here. But in your lens, as you see and as you smell, because I guess they're sending a message through smell here too. What is the message that you receive, or what's the display interpretation that you see?
You want my honest answer?
Yeah, just give it to us, man. Give it. Be real. Be real.
Snobby, arrogant, rich kids.
Snobby area. Yeah, okay. And so this is kind of like an example of different versions of different things, understanding the world around them and what's being displayed.
I do want to do a caveat here. Just because you wear Abercrombie and Fitch or name brand and have the fancy cologne doesn't automatically mean you are a spoiled, bratty rich kid. I'm
Right.
just saying, at that point in my life when I saw that, that's what I thought.
Right. In college, that was what we thought. And that's a big thing for us because we've kind of adjusted our display, like what we perceive to be around us, because we actually met some really amazing people who wore Abercrombie or Fitch and Hollister and wore the cologne and were amazing people and not rich spoiled kids. But for some people, and what we've learned since then is that the desire to look good is not about necessarily a because I'm rich and I got the money and look at me, but it's a desire to present themselves better than what they were before. It's kind of like saying I know what I'm able to do and this is what I want. I want people to see me in a good light, and how they perceive that good light to be is name brand stuff. And it's not a bad thing, right?
Right.
Now, when we were in college, we didn't necessarily these, but on the flip side, people who probably looked at us, unshaven, sleep depraved, nerds. We had one person, we didn't really actually hang out with them, but one of our friends in our freshman year, he got roommated with this one guy who loved his room to be incredibly ice cold. Do you remember this guy? And I can't remember. Yeah, you
I
start.
remember his name.
I don't remember. All I remember is the smell. Like I didn't need anything else. But he never took showers. He never did anything. And he actually wore one coat. He wore a coat. I don't this is the only thing I remember of him is he never showered and he wore a coat. He slept in the coat. He ate in the coat. I never saw him take the coat off. But you could almost smell him a mile away. And it said something about him, or at least we interpreted the way he was presenting himself. Now, obviously, whether right or wrong, that's our perception. And our code that we had in ourselves, and probably still do with certain smells, like it was honestly a traumatizing smell. I'm not going to lie. To this day, I'll never experience anything like that in my life, and I never want to. But when we think about how we present ourselves, we are in a lot of ways using HTML. I mean, like the connection here between HTML tags and the presentation we display upon ourselves about ourselves is connected, because how I dress, how I smell, like these boxes, what's my shirt style, what's my pant style, what cologne do I wear? Do I wear cologne? Do I have glasses? How do I cut my hair? All of these decisions that we make to display ourselves as humans to one another, those are our HTML tags. Is there anything else there that you want to add to that thought of displaying ourselves in HTML connections?
Yeah, well, I think you pretty much said accurately that the clothes we wear, how we look, how we smell, how we present ourselves are basically our tags, the boxes that we put around ourselves that people have to unpack to determine who and what we are, how we look.
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't necessarily mean that in the literal sense. We go up to people and start unpacking them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more of I'm taking the code, their HTML that they're sending to me, and in my mind, I am unpacking that and interpreting it and creating a display or an interpretation of them in my mind.
Exactly. And I think sometimes a really interesting connection that we've kind of made as we're talking about code and why we dedicated an entire episode to this was because the message that you send, and even as we've already talked about with like designer clothes and stuff, is not always the message received. And it all comes down to not just what we put out as our code or what we're, and I know some of these words can be like super divisive, but what I mean is the code that we are sending out to people to interact with. When a code goes to certain people, that code can mean and be interpreted differently. And that's not always a bad thing, but it is a thing that causes a lot of misinterpretation of what we are trying to display.
Right. I mean, it goes back to what we were talking about with the clothes. You had a guy who was worked hard his whole life. He saved up his money so he could go to college. He bought the nice clothes so he could present himself as best as he could. And the message he was trying to send was, hey, I can do this. I'm ready to do this. I'm a good person. I'm taking this seriously.
Mm-hmm.
But the message that we got, and well, I'll speak for myself, that I got, which was a wrong interpretation, I will add, was that he was just a spoiled, bratty rich kid. And it wasn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
And
that kind of thing just happens all the time. It would take any example, any social example of looking at people. I mean, you even hear stories. There are fables about this, of rich, wealthy people dressing poorly and going to places to see how people treat them differently.
mm-hmm. Well, and it happens because the social places that we go, we have predetermined interpretations of certain things, which we have a word for it. It's called a bias, an understanding in which we create, and this is where, I mean, unfortunately, racism, sexism, all of these isms comes from our interpretation of the world around us and how we perceive reality to be. And I think that the problem with some of these biases, well, I think the issue with biases or codes that are interpreted is that when we send codes, sometimes we expect people to interpret them the way we meant them to be.
I would also like to say, maybe I'll get in trouble for saying this, but I think one of the biggest problems we're facing in society today is people projecting their own biases on
Mm-hmm.
other people and assuming that they have the same biases that they have.
Or even just on social groups is
Hmm.
I think like one of the biggest problems that we have is that because of my coding or the perception, and by coding we're not saying like you've been indoctrinated, we're connecting the coding language of HTML to our conversation here. But one of the things that happens is as we've experienced, as we've grown up, we've created an understanding of certain things. Like for us, for me growing up, I saw Hollister and Abercrombie and Fitch. The people that I interacted with that wore those were rich kids, snobby rich kids. And so when I saw that kind of clothing, that's the connection I made. And so people make these connections not just on clothing, but on race types or religious types. I've seen people who look like you, and this is my assumption, and it's like that's where we need to be careful,
Hmm.
is projecting not just our own biases and expecting people to have the same ones, but also projecting our understanding of the world on more than one person. I think there's some really big issues that come out of that.
It becomes very dangerous when you assume motive.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
If something happens and it's a bad thing, a lot of people jump to giving the perpetrator a motive that maybe they don't even have, and they're giving it as a result of projection.
Mm-hmm.
Just to give you an example, and this isn't a real world example, I'm just doing this. If I go outside and I'm walking down the street and some guy comes up to me and something happens and he hits me, I see him out of the corner of my eye come towards me and he hits me and I get knocked over. I might immediately see him as a threat, or he's attacking me, or he hates me, or he's doing whatever. But the reality might be he might have tripped and fallen. he might be on the ground too because he stumbled. He might not have intended to actually harm me or do anything like that. Now, obviously, if he just walks up to me and raises his fist and wails on me, then sure. But, and maybe it's not necessarily the best example, but that kind of thing happens all the time where somebody will do something and you see videos of it online. And the thing that we have to remember, we only see the video perspective of the person who's sending it that verifies their own perspective.
Mm-hmm.
We
Well,
don't see what happens leading up to that or from the other perspective.
I think that's a really important thing. Is one of the things about code, it's a continual changing process, right? We put code, we run it, we find errors, we change it, those kind of things, right? Is that, I mean, especially with HTML, it's kind of a trial by error. We put the code out there, give it a test, see where we're making the mistakes, go back to the code. And I think as human beings, when it comes to this trial and error, we do this. I mean, when I was in middle school, I was doing a lot of trial and error of how to display myself. Do I grow a mustache? Do I not? Do I cut my hair a certain way? Do I wear this kind of clothes? There's a trial and error that we as humans do with our displaying of ourselves. But one of the things that can be a big issue is that we continue to display ourselves in a certain way and expect different results. Like I think that there are certain things that we might try to display, and the world or people around us will interpret them incorrectly. And if I, as the person displaying whatever it is, continue to display the thing, but expect people to change or to adjust their view because I just display this one thing all the time, that's kind of the definition of insanity, right?
Doing the same thing over and over again,
And expecting
different results.
Right. And like I think like we as a society, as people, if we want to see change, not just in ourselves, but in the people around us, to understand or even to bring clarity to what's happening, we need to be willing to change how we display. Now, does that mean that we're going to change the thing inside of us, who we are? I want to be careful here because some people might interpret this by saying, what? You're asking me to change so that other people, well, there's a lot of opinion on I need to change myself for somebody else. Well, if you want to build a relationship with people, yeah, you kind of have to.
I would probably say that you don't necessarily have to change yourself, but change how you try to explain yourself or how you display yourself. If I'm trying to teach you math and I'm have this math book and I'm going over the method in the math book and you're not understanding it, if I keep using that same method of telling you how to do this over and over again, it's never going to work. If my goal is to have you learn math or understand it, then after that method doesn't work, after a few times, it might take me a few times to realize it's the method, I'll try to find a new method and say, okay, here, try this to see if that works. I'm not changing who I am or my goal. I'm adapting my tactics to better fit the situation to accomplish what I want.
Exactly. Well, and going off the math thing is a great example because one of the things that we do as math teachers is even the same method. You can teach the same method a bunch of different ways. So like for instance, when we talk about multiplication, okay, and multiplication with variables, so like 5 times x. What does x mean, or how many x's do I have? The variable doesn't make sense. However, if you can know who your student is, some of their interests, some of the things that go on in their life, which causes you to adjust how you talk about variables. So like when I have students who are into Fortnite, instead of saying X, I'll say, well, we have 5 characters. Or for every weapon or W weapon, we can apply it to 2 characters. So 2 times W. How many characters can we have if we have 5 weapons? Well, that would be 10 characters. And so, but because you connect what they are able to understand in their display language, they can better make that concept or that method connect. And that's what you were talking about, is adjusting how we display what we're talking about.
Because I think this is a problem with anybody everywhere on any side of any aisle.
Mm-hmm.
You grow up a certain way, you get in a bubble. I've done this too. And you expect people to understand that. So when you go out and say something and people don't get it, I at least tend to get mad and blame it on them for not understanding. Maybe it is their fault, maybe it isn't. But regardless, what you're saying isn't getting through. At least try to look at a different way of saying it or approaching it.
Yeah, and sometimes the thing about people too is that change is not always. I mean, you and I are kind of different in this sense too. It's like, so this is an incredibly sarcastic comment, but Taylor loves changing things all the time. You love last minute changes. You love major changes in your life, right?
Oh yeah.
That's really sarcastic, by the way. Taylor does not
really love it.
Right? Whereas for me, I genuinely actually love to look for change. I love flexibility. I love last minute planning. So much so that I Taylor and I's relationship has grown in incredible ways because of my amazing planning skills.
Well, has been good for me to talk and be around somebody like you, because it's never good to necessarily always be set in your ways no matter what, right?
Right. But well so and even just with us in this conversation, I'm not in this conversation, but in this journey as we've grown together to talk about codes and setting up times and being more organized. I have 2 kids. I have a wife. I am teaching full time. My schedule's pretty crazy. And so life happens for both of us. And sometimes my kids have gotten sick or forgot to message something to you. And in doing that, we've had to talk about my last minute canceling of certain things, right? Because before we talked about it, what was your understanding of me saying, "Hey, I can't meet tonight"?
I would get mad.
Why
I
though?
would consider it. I would think it was inconsiderate or you didn't care. But then when I talked to you about things, when we communicated,
Mm-hmm.
I realized, oh, no, you do care. You just have things to take care of and you can't control everything. So I need to stop crying about it.
Well, I wouldn't say you're crying about it, but yeah, I think like,
I
but
exaggerate, but you know.
but also I think for me on my side, for some people they might take this as, well, Nathan, Taylor just needs to adjust his thing to you. You have a life, you have crazy things. It's like, well, no, there's 2 people in this, because just like Taylor has adjusted his thought, I've also adjusted my thought, because I know that on the interpreting side of this, when I change things or when things happen, it's not always, I mean, it's being interpreted a little bit differently because he's adjusted his code for me, but also I need to be willing to adjust my code to say, when I send this out, I want to make sure that I'm not being inconsiderate. Is this a real factor for me to be life really happening, or am I just being rude and inconsiderate to him and saying, like, I really don't want to meet tonight, so I'll make something up? Because people do that. And so in our relationship, really being solid on what we say, which has helped me become actually a really, I mean, I know might sound crazy, but as a person, for me, it's helped me a lot to have somebody like you in my life, because I care about how our relationship is going. And in so doing, the display that I want to put up to you as my friend is, I want to make sure that I'm on time, that we follow through with what we say. And if emergencies come up, then they are real emergencies, things that come up. And that's made me a better person overall. Just like on your side, working with me, it's been what? Like, how have you seen differences or your code changing?
Like we sort of touched on, I have had to rework my biases and not project onto you certain things that I might think are going on when they aren't, and it's helped me to realize, okay, maybe I'm projecting things I shouldn't be projecting, and more than just you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really helped me sort of open my eyes, I guess, as it were, and try to see things from different perspectives. I mean, I'm still me. I still don't like change, and I don't like certain things, but I have a better understanding and a better ability to cope with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also too, I think, okay, so in this relationship of friendship that we have, when I change last minute things, there's an interpretation of what's happened from me to you. And we've established those codes. We've worked hard through trial and error. And honestly, there's been a lot of errors that we've had to, like, adjust. But we've worked on it and we've cared about doing that. Now, if somebody else who you don't have this relationship with cancels on you, like, for instance, let's just say the internet service guy who says he's too busy to come turn your internet on. Are you going to have the same grace for him or the same interpretation of what he says?
In some ways I should, but I don't.
Right? Well, and there's a reason for that, though, is that there's a certain code that he's sending to you because of the relationship or the interpretation that's happening there. And that's not always necessarily wrong, but I do think that there are ways in which we establish certain tags for one another, but also tags for the people around us, expectations for certain things. The body tag or the div tag I send you for certain images is received differently than if your mom sends the same tag. If your mom were to send you some of the gifts that I send you,
I'd be worried.
right? You would interpret that totally differently. And that's appropriate in some settings, right? But I think for us as humans, as we're thinking about the way we display ourselves and the way that we send code out to people, we want to be careful to automatically jump to conclusions. We want to be willing to work on the code that we're sending out, in the sense, like what you were saying, is that should we be more professional in certain areas? And of course we should. What does that professional look like? But also in certain areas, when we see certain people dressed a certain way, what's our automatic interpretation of it? I have a funny story about this. Actually, it happened this evening in a meeting I was doing. If any of you guys know anything about me, I'm a Christian and I do some Bible study stuff. And tonight we were talking about the way we show love to different people. And it was funny because we have a missionary that joins that's a part of our group. And so he's seen different parts of the world and gets to see different lenses, different ways in which cultures perceive certain things. And one of the things that we were talking about specifically when it comes to love is how different religious groups perceive certain tenets or rules of the church or whatever. And he was talking, the story that he shared with us was such a comical one because it happens all the time. But they were doing a music thing and in a different country and practicing this stuff. And then they went to show an American version of a worship song and they finished it. And he asked the group of people, what do you think of that worship song? It was from a popular worship group. And one of the guys said, well, the main singer can't be a Christian because he was wearing blue jeans. Like, and the main singer was like one of these well-known the Christian guys who leads a youth group. I mean, like, he is changing the world for Christianity in a positive way. And the interpretation or the perceived, what was received, wasn't any of the words that the music was saying. Was it anything that was going on? He's wearing blue jeans, so he can't. It's like that error code we were talking about and that's within the context that I live in. But we do this all the time with people around us where we see something, and because we don't know how to interpret that or deal with that, or we haven't put in our own code a way to end that tag, we stop. I'm done. You're wearing blue jeans. Done. I don't care about anything else you're going to do. Blue jeans.
Stuff like that seems silly, but then again, we don't have their perspective. If we had their perspective, it would probably make sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, like the perspective, that's a different culture, obviously, different understanding of certain things. But even here in America, in our culture, we do this all the time with people.
Yeah.
Oh, you smell bad. Can't be with you. Done.
Well, in the tech world, I'll go off of in a different realm.
Yeah.
In the tech world, at least in the circles I've been in, we're sort of out here in the Midwest, a lot of rural areas around. So most of the tech guys, a lot of them have been or are currently farmers even.
Mm.
So at least the people I've worked with. So there's been a sort of a weird stereotype of programmers that I've formed in my mind that probably wouldn't conform to what most people would think of programmer.
My brain is already creating a display, but keep going, keep going.
So we had a guy come in, college kid, had the button-up shirts, the lattes, the haircut, the, I guess, I don't know how best to describe it, maybe hipsterish look
Uh,
with the long hair and the beard. And I remember thinking he's not a programmer, but he was. And it's just the weirdest thing because a lot of people, when I just described that, people say, "Yeah, that sounds like a programmer." But to me, it's like you've never been a farmer. You've never.
oh, I see what you're saying. So, like the people that you think are programmers are a little rougher. They go home and have a rural look to them. But now you
Yes,
have people who come in and
city types as
interesting.
opposed to farmer types.
Interesting.
So obviously that's not correct because the vast majority of programmers are city types. But it's just a little insight into the world I've been in for the past 7 years.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's interesting that goes into our biases is if we have, and here's where we wanted to end our conversation or kind of build a foundation for us to think about HTML code. It's the code that we display. It's a displaying code. And sometimes what we display is not what's being interpreted. And if we expect the people around us to interpret it the way we do, we want them to, and yet are not willing to change how we're displaying it, that's a great setup for
failure.
Because that's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Like the people who will see you will not just not understand, but honestly, like I don't know if you've ever run into a website where you go to it and you refresh every time and you're like, okay, what's wrong with this? Is it my computer? You like run through the steps and you're like, the display is there's an error in this, and it gets frustrating. And if we were willing to help people or walk with people or give different approaches to how we display ourselves, not in the expectation that they would conform to our display. It's like, oh, this is how I want to display myself, so you too need to display. No. But helping people understand what we're displaying about ourselves, walking through and giving them help so that their tags or their understanding of tags can be interpreted in a better way, in a more helpful way.
We can't just expect everyone to automatically understand who or what we are by our appearance.
Right. And also, we can't expect, we also need to be willing to adjust our tags. Just like there are so many isms out there because people aren't willing to adjust their tags of understanding, ooh, there's a white guy. This is my expectation of him. Ooh, there's an Asian guy. This is my expectation. I think that if we were willing to change our understandings and being willing to allow people within those races to help us understand how to change those, I can't change them myself, right? In coding, sometimes you need to bring other perspectives in to help you with the code. I think like when we were talking about HTML, you're great at the code, but being artsy is not one of your best suits, right?
No.
Right. When it comes to like thinking about aesthetically pleasing and other stuff like that, you need to bring other people in to help you do that. You can put things places, but when it comes to the artsy part of it, you got to hand that off to somebody else. And just like us in our own code, we need to allow people to help us with our code. This is what humanity is about, is allowing people to help us understand what is being displayed, but also as we are displaying, allowing people to help us understand what we're displaying. When I was younger, there were some people in my life who decided to step up and help me understand what I was displaying about myself. And for instance, this is specifically connected to the idea of a middle school male nerd who never took showers, who didn't care about what I dressed or that I did laundry. There's a message I was sending to people, and it took somebody to step into my life and help me understand what I was displaying, but also give me the code to display correctly. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me.
And I am a better human because of that help, that receiving of a special, I'm going to call it a special code because it changed my life. Have you experienced stuff like that?
Yeah, I'd probably be rich if I'd been paid for each one of those encounters I've had.
Oh yeah. My life is enriched, but if I got paid for it, I would be rich. Yeah.
Hmm.
Right.
A big thing for my family when we get together is to take family photos.
Hmm.
And we have certain individuals in my family who are very particular about how you dress. You have to dress nicely for those. In my opinion, I could take or leave a photo, and I'd rather dress how I want. Frankly, I just find them inauthentic and annoying to do. Just take a picture of us when we're together with what we're doing. If we have to line up and you have to tell us to smile. Anyway, that's a side tangent. But it's been expressed to me that if I don't take it seriously, if I don't dress appropriately, it comes off as somewhat offensive to people in pictures or upon mantles, and every time they see it, they'd stare at me and look at me doing that and get mad at me. So it's one of those things where I don't necessarily want to offend my family. I just have a different idea of what needs to be done in certain situations than they do, but because of what I've learned, I still don't necessarily like family photos or really want to care too much about them, but I at least do what's necessary so that I don't offend people.
Well, and two, I think offense and anger are secondary emotion.
Yes.
And I think that these are people that you care about, that
Mm-hmm.
you love deeply, and to know that you've hurt them or made them sad or something, you never meant for that to happen. And so because of your love for them as family, you're willing to say, I'm going to display my love for you by doing this, right?
Yeah, I mean, if I didn't care about them, I wouldn't.
Right? That display might seem really dumb, but it's a big thing for you. And this is where certain tags can be interpreted different ways. And that's a big thing for us. As we think about the people that we love, do we really know the tags that we're sending out, how we display our actions and things to people? And in displaying these tags, these ways that we do, how are they being received? Do we know that? Those are really important questions as we think about relationships, because what we send and what's being received can be two totally different things. And if we're not willing to look at our code or look and ask people, how does this look on you? Literally, I've made HTML code in high school. I didn't dive too much into this, where I would create it and I would send it to my professor, my teacher, and they'd be like, nope, you messed this all up. And I'm like, it looked great on my screen. What's wrong with you? No, your code is messed up, because when you send this out to people, the way that most people are going to interpret this is what it's going to look like. And I had to look on his screen. We have to look sometimes through different people's lenses to see what they see. We
Right.
can't perfectly do it.
What you just said brought back some memories of working at my job and making code and working with other programmers to develop code. And I'll just talk about my code because I don't want to have what I say be misinterpreted as bashing anyone. but I would create code on my machine and it would work just fine. Then I would send it up to be tested and it wouldn't work. And they'd tell me it wouldn't work. I say, what are you talking about? It worked on my machine. The number one excuse or thing that programmers have said when the offices I was in, and I was amongst them until I learned a very important lesson. The number one excuse was, it worked on my machine. Okay, great. Your machine isn't the customer's machine. If it doesn't work on the customer's machine, it doesn't work. I had to learn that the hard way and had to be hammered into me. And I think it should be hammered into every programmer. If it doesn't work on the end user or the clients or whoever's using its machine, who you were intending for to use, then your program doesn't work. It could work on your machine all day long, but that doesn't matter.
Well,
I mean, it does for development purposes, but
Well, I think that's a human thing too. If what you're trying to do, if the action that you are doing or the thing that you're trying to display to people doesn't or isn't received in that way. This might sound harsh and cruel and whatever, but just like what you said, it's the same thing with humans. If it's not received that way, it's not going to work. It has failed in its purpose. And I think so many people try really hard to do certain things. And I think we need to give credit where hard work is. But to continue to do the same thing over and over again and expect the end user, the person that you're sending it to see the same thing that you're seeing, it's not going to work. There's some really heavy stuff here for us to kind of think about. But one of the things that we really wanted to make sure that we understood in this is that when it comes to displaying ourselves, there's a great excitement and a beauty in discovering new ways to display ourselves. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we aren't expecting people to just jump on board with it. And that's okay. That's humanity, right?
right.
Next time that we're going to be talking, we'll be talking about CSS. Taylor, do you want to just do a brief overview of what to expect?
Sure. So CSS is basically your style. CSS stands for cascading style sheets. And it's just a way to, I think I mentioned this earlier in the episode. It's what allows you to change colors, sizes, and choose your style.
So we're going to be talking about that in next month's episode. Leave comments about this one. This is an interesting one to talk about when it comes to how we present ourselves, both in our words and in our actions. And so leave us comments. What do you guys think about this? Have you thought about HTML in this light as a display language for your life and doing that?
Boxes within boxes.
Good stuff. Well, we'll see you guys next time. Subscribe, hit the link to follow us.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.